Frances Wells was stirring pasta sauce when her husband's phone lit up beside the wine glasses. Lila, I miss your bed already. Did she suspect anything when you kissed her goodbye this morning? The wooden spoon slipped from Frances's hand. A second message appeared. You were right about her. She really would forgive anything. For a moment, the entire kitchen went silent except for the simmering sauce on the stove and the sound of Austin laughing upstairs on a business call. Frances didn't scream, she didn't cry. She opened his phone, called a divorce lawyer, transferred money into a private account, and 10 minutes later, she still served dinner with a smile on her face. If you've ever stayed calm while your heart was breaking, this story is going to hit harder than you expect. And by the end, tell me honestly, what would you have done differently? The Wells house sat at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac in Highland Park, wrapped in soft golden light and expensive landscaping designed to look effortless. From the outside, it looked like the kind of home people slowed down to admire during evening walks. Inside, Frances Wells was setting the table for dinner with hands that suddenly no longer felt like her own. The polished marble counters gleamed beneath pendant lights Austin had insisted on importing from Italy. The wine breathing on the counter cost more than her mother used to spend on groceries in a month. Every detail of the house whispered wealth, and every inch of it suddenly felt haunted. Upstairs, Austin laughed during a phone call. That laugh used to make her feel safe. Now it made her stomach turn. Frances placed his dinner plate carefully beside the folded linen napkin. Steak medium rare, roasted asparagus, garlic mashed potatoes, the exact meal he loved after stressful meetings. For 12 years, she had memorized the details of his comfort, like religion, and apparently for 12 years, Austin had mistaken devotion for weakness. Her phone buzzed softly beside the stove. The screenshots were still there, Lila. She really would forgive anything. Frances stared at the words again, trying to feel something dramatic. Rage, hysteria, despair. But what frightened her most was the numbness. It was as if her body had decided the pain was too large to process all at once. So, instead, it froze. The front staircase creaked. Austin descended wearing a navy cashmere sweater, with the sleeves rolled to his forearms, looking polished and devastatingly familiar. Tall, controlled, handsome in the kind of expensive corporate American way that made people trust him instantly. The same face she had defended for years. The same hands that had touched another woman hours earlier. There she is, he said warmly. Smells incredible in here. Frances looked at him, really looked at him. And suddenly she noticed things she had ignored for years. The rehearsed charm, the selective attentiveness, the way every interaction revolved subtly around him. Austin kissed her forehead casually while reaching for the wine. Long day, he sighed. The lie slid out of him effortlessly. Frances wondered how many times he had lied exactly like that. How was the board meeting, she asked quietly. Brutal. He loosened his watch. Nathan dragged the financial review out for hours. Nathan Bennett, the company's CFO, one of the only people at Halstead Capital who had ever treated Frances like she existed outside Austin's shadow. Austin poured wine into her glass. You okay? He asked suddenly. Her pulse skipped. Did he know? But his expression remained relaxed. Distracted. Not guilty. Never guilty. Frances forced a faint smile. Just tired. Well, Austin said, lifting his glass, hang in there a little longer. The sentence hit differently now. Hang in there. As if her role in his life had become temporary, as if he already knew the ending. They sat down across from each other at the massive oak dining table Frances had picked out during their 3rd year of marriage. Austin barely looked up from his phone between bites. Years ago, they used to linger at dinner for hours, drinking wine, dreaming together, talking about the future. Before Austin became obsessed with climbing higher, before every conversation became transactional, before Frances slowly disappeared inside his ambitions. You remember the Mercer Foundation gala next Friday? Austin asked. Frances nearly dropped her fork. Mercer. Lila Mercer. The mistress had his last name in her contacts because she was connected to the Mercer Foundation. Jesus Christ. Austin continued, casually oblivious to the blood draining from Frances's face. We need a strong turnout this year. Investors are coming in from New York. Frances swallowed carefully. Of course. You'll handle the hosting side. There it was again. Not, would you mind helping? Not, can we do this together? Just expectation. Frances had organized every dinner party, every fundraiser, every executive retreat for nearly a decade. She knew which wives hated each other, which investors preferred bourbon over wine, which board members flirted too aggressively after their third drink. Austin's career had been built partly on Frances making every room feel effortless, and somehow none of it counted as work. "Sure," she said softly. Austin nodded distractedly. "Oh, and Lila Mercer will be there. She's helping coordinate donor relations this year." Frances felt her heartbeat thud once against her ribs. There it is, the audacity. Austin continued eating while talking about the woman sleeping with him. "She's sharp," he said. "Honestly, one of the smartest people we've brought in lately." Frances stared at him. Was this cruelty? Or had he simply stopped seeing her as human enough to protect? "You seem impressed by her," Frances said carefully. Austin smirked slightly. "Ambitious people impress me." The word sliced cleanly through her chest, because once upon a time Frances had been ambitious too, before she paused her consulting career because Austin's schedule became too demanding, before she handled every social obligation so he could focus, before she became the woman who remembered birthdays, managed appearances, hosted clients, fixed tensions, protected reputations, and absorbed stress until there was nothing left of herself. Austin's success had not happened beside her. It had happened on top of her sacrifices, and suddenly Frances wondered if he had ever truly respected those sacrifices at all. His phone buzzed again against the table. Austin flipped it over instantly, too quickly. Their eyes met for half a second. Something cold moved through the room. "You're protective of your phone lately," Frances said lightly. Austin leaned back immediately, defensive. "Seriously, I didn't say anything. You implied it." There it was, the subtle manipulation, turn her observation into her guilt. Frances noticed now how instinctively he did it. How many years had she spent apologizing after asking perfectly reasonable questions? Austin sighed dramatically and rubbed his temples. "I'm under a lot of pressure right now, Frances." And somehow she knew even now he expected comfort, expected her to soothe him while he betrayed her. The realization made her physically ill, so she stood slowly and collected the dinner plates. "You didn't finish your food," she said quietly. "I lost my appetite." Funny. So had she. At the sink, Frances washed dishes while Austin answered emails behind her. The domestic normalcy of the moment felt grotesque, like they were actors trapped inside a marriage already dead. "You know," Austin said suddenly, "after this promotion finally closes, things will calm down." Frances turned off the water. Promotion. The same promotion he planned to leave her after receiving. The same promotion he and Lila joked about in those messages. She dried her hands carefully. "When exactly were you planning to tell me?" she almost asked. But she stopped herself. Not yet. Because for the first time in years, Frances understood something terrifying. Austin underestimated her completely, and maybe that was finally going to become his biggest mistake. His phone lit up once more across the counter. A preview flashed briefly across the screen before disappearing. "Miss you already." Frances stared at it silently. Then she looked at her husband. Austin Wells smiled at her without an ounce of fear. And that was when Frances realized something even more painful than the affair itself. He truly believed she would stay. Frances waited until Austin fell asleep. That part was easier than she expected. He had always slept peacefully after lying to her. The bedroom was dark except for the faint amber glow of the city lights spilling through the curtains. Austin lay beside her on his back, breathing evenly, one arm stretched across the mattress, like a man completely unafraid of consequences. Frances stared at the ceiling for nearly an hour before finally moving, slowly, carefully, like she was disarming a bomb. Austin's phone rested on the charger beside his watch and wedding ring, the same wedding ring he had removed before touching another woman. Her hand trembled only once before she picked up the phone. She entered their anniversary date automatically, June 14th. The screen unlocked instantly. For a second, Frances almost laughed. Of course he used their anniversary. Even his betrayal carried traces of her devotion. The messages opened exactly where he had left them. Lila Frances inhaled slowly and began scrolling. At first, her brain refused to absorb what she was reading. It felt surreal, like watching someone else's marriage collapse. There were hundreds of messages, photos, voice notes, hotel confirmations, private jokes, entire emotional conversations Austin had not bothered having with his own wife in years. And the worst part wasn't even the sex, it was the intimacy. Lila knew things Frances hadn't heard from Austin in years. His frustrations, his insecurities, his ambitions, the parts of him Frances thought had simply disappeared over time. No, he had saved them for someone else. Her chest tightened painfully. A message from 3 months ago caught her eye. Austin dinner with Frances tonight. Pray for me. Lila, poor you, Austin. Same stories, same routines. Sometimes I think she was born emotionally beige. Frances physically flinched. Emotionally beige. She stared at the phrase until the words blurred. Because she remembered that dinner, she had spent 6 hours preparing it. Austin's investors were visiting from Boston. Frances had arranged flowers, customized menus, seating charts, wine pairings. At midnight, after everyone left, Austin kissed her forehead and said, "You always save me." And then apparently he texted another woman to mock her. Frances kept scrolling. The affair stretched back almost 11 months. 11. Nearly a full year of lies. Her stomach twisted violently as she opened a hotel receipt photo. The date punched the air from her lungs. October 17th, her birthday. The same birthday Austin claimed he missed because of emergency meetings in New York. She remembered crying quietly in the bathtub that night while defending him to her friends. "He's under pressure," she had said. God, how pathetic love could make a woman. Another message appeared, Lila. "When are you finally leaving her?" Austin responded almost immediately. Austin after the promotion clears. Timing matters. Frances's heartbeat slowed strangely. Cold now, focused. She continued reading. Lila. "She's going to lose her mind, Austin." Rebecca from legal already connected me with a strategist. Frances is emotionally dependent. If things get ugly, I'll position the separation around instability and stress. Frances stopped breathing. Instability. He planned to paint her as unstable. Her eyes burned as realization crashed through her. Every recent argument suddenly made sense. Austin documenting emotional moments, asking if she was okay whenever she cried, casually mentioning therapy during disagreements. He had been building a narrative, carefully, strategically, like a businessman preparing a merger, not a husband ending a marriage. Her hands began shaking harder now, but she forced herself to keep reading. Because pain was information now, and information was survival. Another thread contained screenshots of apartments, luxury condos downtown, places Austin had apparently considered for his future with Lila. One photo showed a rooftop pool overlooking Chicago's skyline. Lila. "This feels more us." Austin soon, as if Frances were merely temporary inconvenience, standing between them and their upgraded life. Tears finally burned behind her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Not yet. Then she saw the message that truly broke something inside her. Lila. "Does she suspect anything when you touch her?" A long pause before Austin replied. Austin Frances notices what affects other people. Never herself. The room went completely silent, because that part was true. Frances had spent her entire marriage anticipating everyone else's emotions before her own. Austin's stress, his family's moods, his career anxiety, his image, his comfort. She had loved him so carefully that she disappeared inside the process. And he knew it. Worse, he used it. A sound beside her startled her violently. Austin shifted in his sleep. Frances froze instantly. But he settled again, still unconscious, still safe, still unaware the woman beside him no longer belonged to him emotionally. Frances exhaled shakily and opened his financial apps next. Years of managing charity events and corporate dinners had taught her more about money than Austin realized. Transfers immediately stood out. Large ones, consulting fees, vendor reimbursements, executive hospitality expenses, but several account numbers repeated suspiciously. Frances took photos with her phone quickly. Then she opened shared cloud files. Folders appeared. Taxes, investment portfolios, internal financial summaries. And hidden beneath one archive folder was a spreadsheet labeled Transition Planning. Her pulse roared. Frances clicked it open. A detailed breakdown filled the screen. Projected divorce costs, asset shielding strategies, property division scenarios. She felt physically ill. Austin had planned their marriage like an exit strategy. One line nearly made her scream. Recommendation delay filing until post-promotion. Compensation package finalizes. Compensation package. That was what 12 years together had become. a financial inconvenience, to optimize. Frances covered her mouth as nausea climbed her throat. For the first time all night, anger finally arrived. Not explosive anger. Worse. Cold anger. The kind that sharpened instead of shattered. Austin shifted again beside her, murmuring something incoherent in his sleep. Frances looked at him differently now. Not as her husband. Not even as the man who betrayed her. But as someone dangerous. Because cheating was cruel, but calculated emotional destruction that was something darker. She grabbed the flash drive from Austin's desk drawer, a gift she once bought him for work trips. Ironically, he had never used it. Frances copied everything she could find, financial statements, messages, transfers, documents. Every second felt like stealing pieces of her own life back. Halfway through the transfer, she heard footsteps downstairs. Her entire body locked. The security system beeped softly, then silence. Probably the house settling. Still, adrenaline flooded her veins. She unplugged the drive quickly and slid Austin's phone back onto the charger, exactly where it had been. Everything looked untouched, normal, just like their marriage had looked from the outside. Frances sat back against the headboard while Austin slept inches away, and suddenly she understood why she hadn't cried yet, because grief required safety. And she was no longer safe here, not emotionally, not financially, possibly not legally. The realization settled heavily into her chest. Austin had not simply fallen in love with someone else. He had prepared to erase Frances carefully from his life while still eating meals she cooked and sleeping beside her every night. That level of betrayal changed a person permanently. At 3:17 a.m., Austin's phone buzzed again. A new message from Lila lit the darkness. "Lila, I miss you already." Frances stared at the screen, then at the man sleeping beside her, and for the first time since reading the messages, she smiled. Not because she forgave him, not because she stopped hurting, but because Austin Wells still believed he was the smartest person in the room, and he had absolutely no idea his wife was already planning his downfall. The next morning, Frances woke before sunrise, not because she had slept well, because betrayal had rewired her nervous system overnight. For 12 years, mornings beside Austin had carried a strange comfort. Even during difficult seasons, there had always been familiarity in the rhythm of waking beside him. Now every sound felt threatening. The bathroom door opened and steam drifted into the bedroom as Austin adjusted his cufflinks in the mirror. "You're up early," he said casually. Frances sat against the headboard holding a cup of coffee she didn't remember making. "So are you," Austin smirked faintly. "Big week. Big week." The words almost made her laugh. Because yes, it was going to become a very big week for him. He approached the bed and kissed the top of her head absent-mindedly while checking emails on his phone. That was the part Frances couldn't stop noticing now. The multitasking affection, the automatic gestures, like loving her had become muscle memory rather than feeling. "You should come into the city today," Austin said. "Buy yourself something nice before the gala." Frances looked up slowly. The gala, the event where he planned to parade his mistress through rooms Frances herself had organized. "You think I need a reward?" she asked lightly. Austin loosened his tie slightly. "I think you've been tense lately." There it was again, the subtle positioning. "You're emotional. You're unstable. You're struggling." Not obvious enough to confront directly, just enough to establish a narrative over time. Frances suddenly wondered how long he had been preparing for this psychologically. "How thoughtful of you," she replied. Austin smiled, relieved by her softness. God, he really thought she was blind. By 9:30 that morning, Austin had left for work. Frances stood alone in the kitchen, staring at the spotless counters, while silence swallowed the house. Then she did something she had not done in years. She opened her old consulting portfolio. The leather binder sat buried in the back of her office closet beneath charity files and holiday decorations. Dust coated the edges. Frances brushed it away slowly. Inside were business strategies, marketing projections, client notes, and development proposals from another version of herself, the ambitious version, the sharp version, the woman who once walked confidently into corporate boardrooms before slowly being reassigned into the role of supportive wife. She flipped through pages silently. Chicago Urban Retail Expansion Project, Morrison Hospitality Group, Lakeview Brand Consulting. Her work had been brilliant, detailed, strategic, creative, and she had abandoned all of it because Austin once sat across from her at dinner and said, "It's just temporary, Frankie. Once things stabilize, you can go back to anything you want." Temporary, the lie women ruined themselves believing. Her phone buzzed suddenly. Evelyn Wells. Frances almost declined the call immediately, but she answered anyway. "Good morning, Frances," Evelyn said in her crisp, polished voice. "Austin mentioned you seemed tired yesterday." "Of course he did." Evelyn Wells monitored emotional appearances the way other women monitored stock markets. "We're fine," Frances replied carefully. A pause. Too long. Then Evelyn sighed softly. "You know how demanding Austin's career is right now." Frances closed her eyes, already protecting him, always protecting him. "He works incredibly hard," Evelyn continued. "Men under that kind of pressure need peace at home." The implication settled heavily between them. If Austin was unhappy, Frances had somehow failed. It had always been this way with Evelyn. Subtle criticism wrapped in elegance. Never cruel enough to quote directly, just enough to slowly make Frances feel inadequate. "I understand," Frances said quietly. "I know you do, sweetheart," Evelyn replied. "That's why Austin chose you." Chose you, like Frances had been selected for functionality, not loved. After hanging up, Frances sat motionless at the kitchen island for several minutes. Then she opened Austin's text thread again. This time she forced herself to study it differently. Not emotionally, strategically. Patterns emerged immediately. Austin often texted Lila during specific windows, late afternoons, after client dinners, during charity planning meetings. Frances opened their shared family calendar. Her stomach tightened. The affair had flourished inside the exact spaces Frances herself had created for his career advancement. Every gala, every networking trip, every donor weekend. She had unknowingly built the infrastructure for her own humiliation. A sudden memory surfaced sharply. 3 months ago, the Aspen investor retreat. Frances had stayed home with pneumonia while Austin insisted he couldn't miss the trip. "You know how important this is," he told her while packing. Later that weekend, he barely answered her calls. Now she found photos in the message thread. Lila in Aspen, wearing Austin's sweatshirt. Standing on the balcony of the same resort suite Frances had booked for him. Frances physically recoiled from the screen. For a moment, grief cracked through her composure so violently she thought she might collapse. Her chest tightened painfully. 12 years. 12 years reduced to lies, hidden behind luxury vacations and curated smiles. She stumbled into the downstairs bathroom and gripped the sink. The woman staring back at her looked composed, too composed. Perfect hair, cream sweater, diamond earrings Austin bought last Christmas, a woman people envied, a woman dying quietly inside a beautiful house. Frances suddenly ripped the earrings from her ears and threw them onto the marble counter. The sharp clatter echoed through the bathroom. Good, something should sound broken. Her phone rang again. Austin. She stared at his name lighting up the screen, then answered calmly. "Hey," she said. "Hey." His voice carried background office noise. "You okay?" There it was again, testing the narrative, monitoring emotional stability. "I'm fine." "You sure?" "Yes, Austin." A pause. Then his tone softened artificially. "You know I worry about you." Frances almost laughed out loud. Worry. The man actively planning to destroy her reputation was worried about her. "How's your day?" she asked. "Crazy." Nathan's breathing down everyone's neck about compliance reports. Nathan Bennett again. "Interesting." Austin continued speaking. "By the way, I need you at the gala early Friday. Lila's coordinating guest logistics with you." Frances went still. With you. Austin intended to place his wife and mistress, side by side, at an event Frances herself was hosting. The cruelty of it was almost artistic. "Sounds fun," Frances replied evenly. Austin chuckled distractedly, completely missing the edge in her voice. "You're the best, Frankie." And there it was. The familiar affection, the soft nickname, the same tone that once made her melt. Now it sounded like manipulation dipped in honey. After the call ended, Frances sat quietly in the massive kitchen. Then she opened her laptop. Not to cry, not to spiral, to prepare. She searched top divorce attorneys in Chicago. One name appeared repeatedly, Rebecca Sloan, known for high-net-worth divorces and aggressive financial litigation. Frances clicked the number immediately before she could lose courage. The receptionist answered warmly, "Sloan and Associates." Frances swallowed hard. For one terrifying second, speaking the truth out loud felt impossible. Then she remembered Austin's messages, emotionally beige, convenient, predictable, and something inside her hardened permanently. "I'd like to schedule a consultation," Frances said calmly. "Of course. What's the nature of the case?" Frances stared out the kitchen windows at the perfectly manicured backyard she once believed represented stability. Then she answered quietly, "My husband is having an affair." The words hung in the air, real now, dangerously real, and for the first time since discovering the texts, Frances no longer felt like a victim sitting inside the ruins of her marriage. She felt like a woman waking up inside a war. Rebecca Sloane's office overlooked downtown Chicago from the 32nd floor of a steel and glass tower that smelled faintly of espresso and expensive perfume. The kind of place where powerful people came to protect themselves from other powerful people. Frances sat in the reception area, twisting her wedding ring slowly around her finger while rain streaked against the windows behind her. Every instinct inside her screamed that she should leave, not because she loved Austin, but because 12 years of marriage had trained her to minimize her own pain. Maybe she was overreacting. Maybe affairs happened all the time. Maybe marriages survived worse. Then she remembered the spreadsheet labeled transition planning. The nausea returned instantly. A woman in a charcoal gray suit approached her with calm precision. Mrs. Wells Frances stood. "I'm Rebecca Sloane." Rebecca was striking in a controlled, intimidating way. Mid-40s, sharp eyes, no wasted movement. The kind of woman who looked like she had never once apologized unnecessarily in her life. Frances immediately envied her. Rebecca guided her into a private office lined with legal books and minimalist art. "No assistance," Rebecca said while closing the door. "No interruptions. Everything discussed here stays here." Something about the directness almost unraveled Frances emotionally. She sat carefully across from the desk. Rebecca opened a leather notebook. "Tell me everything." And somehow that was the hardest part. Not discovering the affair, not reading the messages, not even seeing the cruelty hidden inside Austin's words. No. The hardest part was saying it out loud. "My husband is cheating on me," Frances whispered. Rebecca nodded once. No pity, no dramatic sympathy, just attention. "How long have you known? 3 days? And how long has the affair been happening? Almost a year." Rebecca's expression didn't change, but her pen paused briefly. "That's significant." Frances let out a brittle laugh. "That's one word for it." Rebecca leaned back slightly. "Do you believe the affair is emotional, physical, or both?" Frances almost said, "Does it matter?" But it did matter. Because emotional betrayal cut deeper than sex ever could. "Both," she answered quietly. "But honestly, I think the emotional part hurts more." Rebecca studied her for a moment. That usually means the marriage was deteriorating long before discovery. Frances looked down at her hands. Yes. Silence settled between them briefly before Rebecca spoke again. "Do you have evidence?" Frances slid the flash drive across the desk. "Messages, financial documents, photos." Rebecca inserted it into her laptop and began reviewing the files. For several minutes, only the sound of rain filled the office. Then Rebecca's expression sharpened. "Interesting." Frances stiffened immediately. What Rebecca turned the screen slightly. These transfers, rows of financial records filled the monitor. Consulting reimbursements, hospitality expenses, vendor allocations. At first glance, they looked legitimate, but Rebecca pointed calmly toward repeated payment structures. These are unusually consistent for discretionary expenses. Frances swallowed hard. "I thought something looked strange." "You were right." Rebecca continued scanning documents. Then she opened screenshots of Austin's texts. Her jaw tightened slightly for the first time. "Oh, he's arrogant." Frances almost smiled despite herself. "Yes." Rebecca read silently for another minute before closing the laptop carefully. "Mrs. Wells Frances," Rebecca nodded once. "Frances, your husband is not preparing for a divorce emotionally." A chill moved through her chest. "He's preparing strategically." The words landed heavily, because Frances already knew that, but hearing another woman confirm it made the danger real. Rebecca folded her hands. "The language about emotional instability concerns me." Frances looked away immediately. "I thought so too. Has Austin encouraged therapy recently?" "Yes. Documented emotional reactions." Frances froze. Rebecca noticed instantly. "He has, hasn't he?" Francis nodded slowly. He asks if I'm okay constantly now, especially if I get upset. Rebecca exhaled sharply through her nose. I've seen this before. The room suddenly felt colder. Rebecca continued carefully. Men in high-income divorces sometimes attempt to establish emotional narratives before separation, especially if finances are involved. Narratives, not truth. Narratives. Francis stared at the skyline beyond the glass windows. My whole marriage feels fake suddenly. Rebecca's voice softened slightly for the first time. No, don't rewrite your entire life because someone betrayed you. Francis blinked. You loved honestly. He manipulated dishonestly. Those are not equal failures. The sentence hit something deep inside her. For days, Francis had been drowning in humiliation. What did Lila have that she didn't? When did Austin stop loving her? How had she missed it? But Rebecca's words shifted something quietly. Austin's betrayal was a reflection of Austin, not proof Francis lacked value. Rebecca opened another document, then she suddenly frowned. What is Halstead Capital's current internal structure? Francis hesitated. Austin oversees strategic partnerships, and Lila Mercer, she coordinates donor relations through the Mercer Foundation. Rebecca tapped one manicured nail against the desk thoughtfully. That creates potential overlap issues. Francis frowned slightly, meaning, Rebecca turned the screen again. These payments tied to hospitality accounts. Some appear connected to Mercer Foundation events. Francis's pulse quickened. You think company money funded the affair? I think Rebecca said carefully, your husband may have blurred financial boundaries in ways that become very dangerous during litigation. Dangerous. The word echoed loudly in Francis's chest. For the first time since discovering everything, she saw something beyond heartbreak. Leverage. Rebecca continued speaking calmly. Right now your priority is protection. What do I do? Rebecca's eyes locked onto hers. You stay quiet. Francis nodded slowly. No confrontation, no emotional scenes, no warnings. The calmness in Rebecca's voice made the strategy feel surgical. Can you do that? Francis thought about Austin sleeping peacefully beside her while planning her destruction. Yes. Good. Rebecca opened a folder and slid several papers across the desk. These are immediate recommendations. Francis scanned the list. Open independent accounts, secure copies of all financial records, change passwords, document assets, avoid emotional confrontation, preserve evidence. The clinical nature of it all felt surreal, like preparing for war against someone who still kissed her goodbye every morning. What if he notices? Francis asked quietly. He probably won't. Rebecca's answer came too fast. Francis frowned. Rebecca gave a humorless smile. Men who underestimate women usually underestimate them completely. For the first time in days, genuine warmth flickered inside Francis's chest. Not hope exactly, but clarity. Rebecca continued reviewing documents again before suddenly stopping. What? Rebecca enlarged one transaction, a consulting payment routed through a secondary vendor account, repeated 3 times, each payment just under internal audit thresholds. Rebecca looked up slowly. Francis, these transactions are structured very carefully. A knot tightened in her stomach. You think he hid money. I think your husband may have done more than cheat. The rain outside intensified softly against the glass. Rebecca's gaze sharpened. And if that's true, Austin Wells has much bigger problems than divorce. Francis sat completely still. For days she had viewed herself as abandoned, humiliated, discarded. But suddenly the balance inside the room shifted, because maybe Austin wasn't holding all the power anymore. Rebecca closed the folder carefully. One more thing. Francis looked up. When men like your husband lose control, Rebecca said evenly, they become unpredictable. A chill slid down Francis's spine. What do you mean? I mean you should prepare emotionally for manipulation. Charm, anger, tears, possibly intimidation. Francis swallowed hard. That doesn't sound like Austin. Rebecca held her gaze steadily. You'd be surprised how quickly people change once consequences arrive. The office fell silent again. Finally, Rebecca stood and extended her hand. We move carefully from here. Francis rose slowly. For the first time since reading those messages, she no longer felt frozen, still heartbroken, still devastated, but no longer helpless. As she turned toward the door, Rebecca spoke once more. "Oh, and Francis." She paused. Rebecca's expression remained calm and razor-sharp. "Your husband made one critical mistake." Francis waited. He assumed your kindness meant weakness. The word settled into Francis's chest like something awakening, and suddenly, for the first time in 12 years, she wanted Austin Wells to underestimate her. The ballroom at the Langford Hotel glowed like a jewel box. Crystal chandeliers reflected against champagne towers and polished marble floors, while Chicago's elite drifted elegantly beneath soft gold lighting. Women in couture gowns air-kissed each other beside towering floral arrangements Frances herself had chosen 3 weeks earlier. Every detail of the Mercer Foundation Gala carried her fingerprints, and tonight every detail felt poisoned. Frances stood near the entrance in a black satin gown that hugged her figure with quiet sophistication. Her hair fell in smooth waves over one shoulder, diamond studs catching the light each time she turned her head. Beautiful, controlled, unreadable. The exact opposite of how she felt inside. "You look incredible." Austin's voice appeared beside her suddenly. Frances turned. For half a second, the sight of him still hit her instinctively. Tailored tuxedo, confident posture, that polished charm people mistook for integrity. He looked like a man who had never broken anything in his life. "You clean up well yourself," she replied smoothly. Austin smiled, relieved. The past week had unsettled him slightly. Frances noticed it in small ways. The longer glances, the subtle checking, the way he seemed to study her reactions more carefully now. Not because he suspected the truth. Because somewhere deep down, manipulative people always sensed when control started slipping. "You okay?" he asked quietly. There it was again. That question, monitoring, managing. Frances sipped champagne calmly. "Why wouldn't I be, Austin?" Held her gaze for a second too long before someone interrupted him with a handshake. "Wells' great turnout tonight." Austin instantly transformed into corporate Austin, charismatic, smooth, effortlessly impressive. Frances used to admire how quickly he could command a room. Now she saw it differently. Performance. Every version of Austin belonged to whoever benefited him most. "Excuse me 1 second," he told Frances, and just like that he disappeared into the crowd, leaving his wife alone at an event she built for him. Frances watched him laugh beside investors near the stage, while servers floated past carrying champagne flutes. For years she had mistaken proximity for partnership. Standing beside powerful men did not mean they valued the women supporting them. "Mrs. Wells." Frances turned politely. Nathan Bennett approached holding a bourbon glass. His dark suit contrasted sharply against his tired expression. Nathan always looked like a man carrying invisible stress. "Beautiful event," he said sincerely. "Thank you." His eyes moved briefly across the ballroom toward Austin. "You always make these things look effortless." Frances almost laughed. Effortless. The word women heard right before collapsing from exhaustion. "That's the trick," she replied softly. Nathan studied her carefully for a moment, as though noticing something unusual beneath her calm exterior. Before he could respond, movement near the staircase pulled attention across the ballroom, and suddenly the air changed. Lila Mercer had arrived. Frances recognized her instantly from the photos. Tall, elegant, younger than Frances by at least 8 years. The kind of beauty designed for modern luxury branding campaigns. But it wasn't Lila herself that made Frances's stomach drop. It was the silver dress, because Frances had seen Austin staring at that dress online 6 months earlier. He claimed it was for a client recommendation. Lila descended the staircase, slowly smiling confidently, as several executives greeted her warmly. Completely comfortable, completely unashamed. Like she belonged here. Like Frances was the outsider in her own life. Then Lila spotted Austin across the ballroom, and the smile on her face changed. Tiny, almost invisible, but intimate, a private look. The kind lovers exchanged instinctively. Frances felt humiliation move through her body like heat, not because Austin desired another woman, because he had invited both women into the same room, believing only one mattered enough to protect. Lila approached gracefully. "Austin," she said warmly, too warmly. Frances noticed immediately how Austin's posture shifted subtly around her, more alive, more attentive, the tiny details only wives noticed. Austin cleared his throat quickly. "Frances, this is Lila Mercer." Lila extended perfectly manicured fingers toward her. Finally, the woman who helped destroy her marriage. It's so nice to meet you properly, Lila said smoothly. Frances shook her hand. Her skin was warm, human, ordinary. Not some irresistible fantasy creature worth detonating 12 years for. You too, Frances replied calmly. Lila smiled brightly. Austin talks about you constantly. The lie nearly impressed her. Frances tilted her head slightly. I'm sure he does. Something flickered briefly in Lila's expression. Not fear, but caution. Interesting. Maybe the mistress wasn't as comfortable as she pretended. Austin quickly stepped between them conversationally. Lila basically saved the donor crisis last month, he said proudly. Frances looked at him proudly. He spoke about his mistress with admiration directly in front of his wife. The disrespect was almost surreal. Lila laughed lightly. Austin exaggerates. No, Austin replied. You're one of the smartest people we've brought into the foundation. There it was again. The praise, the admiration, the emotional energy Austin stopped giving Frances years ago. Frances smiled softly, then noticed the earrings. Diamond drop earrings sparkling beneath Lila's hair. Her pulse stopped. Because Frances knew those earrings. She picked them out herself at Cartier last Christmas after Austin claimed he needed executive gifts for clients. A strange buzzing filled her ears. Lila touched one earring casually while speaking. I swear, these things weigh a pound, Austin smirked. I told you they suited you. The room blurred for half a second, not because of the affair. Because of the intimacy hidden inside ordinary conversation, shared memories, private moments, familiarity. Austin had been building another relationship while Frances still believed she was fighting to save theirs. Nathan Bennett appeared nearby again, watching quietly. His eyes moved once between Frances and Austin, then toward the earrings, and suddenly Nathan looked uncomfortable. Interesting. Very interesting. A photographer interrupted them briefly. Mr. and Mrs. Wells' quick photo. Austin immediately placed one hand against Frances's lower back. The gesture nearly made her recoil, but cameras flashed before she could move, smile, pretend, perform. Frances turned toward Austin gracefully while the photographer adjusted lighting. You know, she said softly enough, only he could hear you're very convincing. Austin smiled automatically for the camera. What does that mean? Frances held his gaze. You make lying look effortless. For the first time all evening, Austin's composure cracked slightly. Only slightly, but enough. The photographer lowered the camera. Perfect, he said. Austin's hand tightened subtly against Frances's back. You okay? He asked quietly once they stepped aside. Again, always checking emotional temperature. Frances almost pitied him suddenly, because manipulative people eventually became trapped inside their own performance. I'm wonderful, she answered, and for the first time Austin didn't entirely believe her. Later that evening, Frances stood near the ballroom balcony watching city lights shimmer across the river below. Inside, laughter echoed beneath chandeliers. Behind her, she heard Lila's voice drifting through the crowd. Then one sentence reached her clearly. Oh, I stayed at the Wells Lake House once. It's gorgeous. Frances froze instantly. The lake house, their private Michigan property, the place Austin once called sacred because it was where he proposed. Her fingers tightened slowly around the champagne glass. Austin had brought his mistress there, into her memories, into her marriage, into spaces built from love. Something cold and irreversible settled inside Frances's chest. Behind her, applause suddenly erupted. The foundation director approached the stage microphone, and now he announced warmly a few words from the woman who helped make, tonight, possible Mrs. Frances Wells. The ballroom turned toward her instantly, hundreds of eyes. Austin looked relieved, proud even, still believing she would protect him publicly. Frances placed her champagne glass down carefully. Then she smiled and walked toward the stage. The applause followed Frances all the way to the stage, warm, admiring, oblivious. She climbed the small staircase slowly, every heartbeat unnaturally calm inside her chest. The ballroom shimmered beneath crystal chandeliers while Chicago's wealthiest donors watched her with polite anticipation. For years, Frances had stood in rooms like this smiling beside Austin while shrinking herself smaller and smaller to protect his spotlight. Tonight felt different. Tonight, something inside her had stopped begging to be loved correctly. The foundation director handed her the microphone. None of these events would happen without Frances Wells, he said warmly. She is truly the heart behind this organization. The irony almost made her laugh. The heart behind everything. Yes, that had always been the problem. Frances stepped toward the microphone while applause faded into silence. Across the ballroom, Austin stood near the investors' table, watching her carefully. Lila remained beside him, holding a champagne flute silver dress, sparkling beneath the lights. For a moment, Frances wondered if either of them felt even a fraction of the humiliation she carried. Probably not. People who betrayed others rarely experience the full weight of what they destroyed, not until consequences arrived. Frances smiled gracefully at the crowd. Thank you all for being here tonight. Her voice came out calm, steady, controlled. Years of hosting events had taught her exactly how to command a room without raising her voice. She looked across the ballroom slowly, at the wives smiling beside powerful husbands, at executives networking beside charity banners, at Austin standing there in his tailored tuxedo, pretending integrity was woven into his DNA. And suddenly Frances understood something devastating. Most women in rooms like this were exhausted, beautifully dressed, perfectly polished, and quietly disappearing. I've spent many years helping organize evenings like this, Frances continued softly. And one thing I've learned is that people love celebrating success. Nods moved through the room. Austin relaxed slightly. Good, let him. But success, Frances said carefully, rarely belongs to one person. Something shifted subtly in the crowd. A few people straightened. Nathan Bennett looked up immediately from across the ballroom. Frances continued. There are always invisible hands behind every powerful man. Now Austin's smile faded slightly. Only slightly. But enough. The women who manage homes while careers are built. The women who smooth over tensions. The women who host the dinners, remember the birthdays, calm. The anxieties, protect the image. Her gaze drifted slowly toward Austin. And often sacrifice themselves quietly so someone else can shine. The ballroom had gone almost completely silent. Frances noticed Evelyn Wells near the back table stiffen instantly. Good, let her hear this too. Austin's jaw tightened faintly. He still didn't know how much she knew, but instinct was beginning to warn him. Frances smiled softly again. The interesting thing about invisible labor, she continued, is that people usually only notice it once it disappears. A few women in the crowd exchanged glances. One older donor's wife lowered her champagne glass, slowly. They understood. Of course they understood. Women always understood each other's exhaustion, even when nobody said it aloud. Austin shifted uncomfortably near the stage. Frances could practically feel him wanting her speech to end. Not because she had exposed him directly, because truth carried energy, and manipulative people recognized danger the moment honesty entered a room. Frances turned slightly toward the foundation banners behind her. The Mercer Foundation exists because of generosity, she said elegantly, because of loyalty, because people choose to build something larger than themselves. Lila's expression changed briefly. Tiny, but Frances caught it. The mistress was nervous now, interesting, loyalty. Frances repeated softly into the microphone, is a beautiful thing. The room remained silent. It's rare. Austin looked directly at her now. No smile, no performance, just calculation. Frances felt adrenaline flicker warmly through her bloodstream. Good. For once let him feel uncertain, especially in a world where people are constantly chasing the next exciting thing. She paused gently. The next opportunity, the next version of happiness. Nathan Bennett stared openly now. Several executives looked visibly uncomfortable. One investor cleared his throat awkwardly. Austin finally stepped forward slightly as if preparing to intervene. Too late, Frances smiled again, but I still believe the people who build quietly in the background deserve recognition too. Her eyes swept through the ballroom one final time. So tonight I'd like to make a toast. Servers paused instinctively around the room. Champagne glasses lifted slowly. Frances raised her own glass with graceful precision. To the women who hold entire lives together while nobody notices. The room softened instantly, emotional, connected. Several women smiled sadly. Frances continued. To the women who love loyally, to the women who sacrifice deeply, to the women who remain kind, even after discovering they were underestimated. Austin went completely still. There it was, the first real hit, Not exposure, recognition. He knew now. Maybe not how much, but enough. Francis looked directly at him, and most importantly, the ballroom felt breathless. To the women who eventually realized they deserved better all along. Silence. Pure silence. Then scattered applause began slowly, not loud, not celebratory, emotional, real. Within seconds, the entire ballroom erupted into applause again, but the energy had changed now. People were thinking, watching, sensing tension beneath the elegance. Austin forced a smile immediately and began clapping too. Of course he did. Performance until the very end. Frances stepped away from the microphone and handed it back to the stunned director. As she descended the staircase, Austin intercepted her almost instantly. "What the hell was that?" he asked quietly through clenched teeth. Frances blinked innocently. "A speech. You know what I mean." His composure was slipping, tiny cracks, but growing. She tilted her head slightly. "You seemed uncomfortable." Austin lowered his voice further. "Are you trying to embarrass me?" The audacity almost impressed her. Embarrass him, not, "Are you hurt?" Not, "Did I do something wrong?" Just reputation, always reputation. Frances smiled softly. "If a general speech about loyalty embarrasses you, Austin, maybe you should ask yourself why." For the first time since discovering the affair, she watched genuine uncertainty enter his eyes. Then someone approached suddenly. "Mrs. Wells, Nathan Bennett." Austin straightened, immediately corporate mask, sliding back into place. "Nathan," he said tightly. Nathan barely looked at him. His attention remained on Frances. "That was an excellent speech. Thank you." Nathan hesitated, then glanced once toward Austin before speaking carefully. "There are some things regarding company finances that concern me." Austin's entire posture changed instantly. Sharp now. Alert. Nathan Austin interrupted smoothly. "This probably isn't the time." Nathan ignored him. "I think Frances deserves full transparency." The temperature between the three of them dropped immediately. Austin laughed once. "Short, controlled." "What exactly is that supposed to mean?" Nathan finally met his eyes directly. "It means certain expense reports may become problematic soon." Austin's jaw flexed visibly. Frances watched both men carefully. "Interesting. Very interesting." Nathan lowered his voice slightly. "Mrs. Wells, if you ever need clarification about certain transactions, I'd be willing to help." Austin stepped forward immediately. "That's enough." There it was. Fear. Not emotional fear. Professional fear. Nathan remained calm. "I'm trying to do the ethical thing." Austin's voice sharpened dangerously. "Then maybe start by minding your own department." People nearby had started noticing the tension now. Lila stood across the ballroom, watching anxiously. Frances suddenly understood something important. Austin wasn't scared of losing her yet. He was scared of losing control. Nathan reached into his suit pocket calmly, then handed Frances a business card. "If you need anything," he said quietly. Their fingers brushed briefly, and in that tiny moment Frances saw it clearly in Nathan's eyes. He knew. Maybe not everything, but enough. Austin stared at the card in Frances's hand like it was a loaded weapon, and for the first time all night, he looked genuinely nervous. Frances waited exactly 14 hours before calling Nathan Bennett. Not because she was uncertain, because Rebecca Sloan had warned her carefully. "Never move emotionally," Rebecca said during their last meeting. "Move deliberately." So Frances spent the night pretending everything was normal. She returned home from the gala beside Austin while tension filled the silence between them like smoke. He asked twice if she was upset. She answered calmly both times. Then she lay beside him in bed while he stared at his phone long after midnight, probably texting Lila, probably trying to reassure himself that he still controlled the narrative. Frances almost pitied him now. Almost. The next afternoon, Nathan texted her an address downtown. No explanation, just a location. A private whiskey bar hidden beneath an old Chicago hotel. Dark wood, dim lighting, expensive discretion. The kind of place where executives confess things they could never say inside offices. Nathan was already seated in the back corner when Frances arrived. He stood immediately as she approached. "Thank you for coming." Frances slid into the booth across from him carefully. "You said there were things I deserved to know." Nathan's expression tightened. "Yes." A server approached briefly. Frances ordered sparkling water. Nathan barely touched the bourbon already sitting in front of him. For a few moments neither spoke, then Nathan exhaled heavily. "How much do you already know?" Francis met his eyes steadily. "I know Austin's been having an affair with Lila Mercer for almost a year." Nathan closed his eyes briefly. "Jesus. And I know he's been moving money." That got his attention instantly. Nathan leaned forward slightly. "What exactly did you find?" Francis chose her words carefully. "Enough to know he wasn't just planning to leave me. He was planning to protect himself financially first." Nathan stared at the table for several seconds before nodding slowly. "Yeah," he muttered quietly. "That sounds like Austin." The sentence hurt more than she expected. Not because Nathan confirmed Austin's behavior, because it meant this version of Austin wasn't new. Other people had seen parts of him Francis spent years explaining away. Nathan finally looked up again. "Francis, Austin's not just reckless emotionally, he's reckless professionally." A cold knot tightened in her stomach. How bad Nathan reached into his leather briefcase and removed a flash drive. The same object suddenly felt terrifying now. He placed it carefully between them. "There are internal financial records on this drive," he said quietly. "Expense reports, reimbursement chains, vendor approvals." Francis didn't touch it yet. "What kind of expenses?" Nathan gave a humorless laugh, the kind that becomes scandals. The whiskey bar buzzed softly around them while Francis tried to steady her breathing. Nathan lowered his voice further. Austin used company accounts to fund parts of the affair. There it was, spoken out loud, real now. Francis felt strangely calm. How luxury travel billed through investor relations, hospitality expenses rerouted through foundation events, apartment payments hidden inside consulting reimbursements. Francis's pulse slowed dangerously. He bought her apartment with company money, partially. Nathan rubbed his jaw tiredly. "At first I thought it was sloppy bookkeeping. Then patterns started appearing." He slid a folder toward her. Francis opened it carefully. Receipts, transfers, internal approvals. Her stomach turned. Hotel suites, jewelry purchases, private flights. Some expenses were disguised beneath foundation development costs. Others carried forged approval signatures. "Oh my God," Nathan nodded grimly. "The board hasn't caught it yet, but they will." Francis looked up sharply. "You're telling me Austin committed fraud?" Nathan hesitated carefully. "I'm telling you, Austin blurred ethical lines in ways that could destroy his career. Destroy." The word echoed heavily inside her. For years, Francis feared losing Austin. Now other people were warning her that Austin might lose everything himself. Nathan leaned back against the booth. "I tried warning him months ago." Francis frowned. "You knew?" "Not about the affair at first." Nathan looked disgusted suddenly. "But I knew he was hiding things." "What did he say?" Nathan laughed bitterly. "He said I worried too much. That successful people take risks. Typical Austin. Charm wrapped around arrogance." Nathan stared at the bourbon glass untouched in front of him. "You know the worst part?" he asked quietly. Francis waited. He used to be different. Something painful flickered inside her chest. Because she believed that too. Once upon a time, Austin had been ambitious without becoming cruel. Or maybe she only wanted to believe that version existed. Nathan continued quietly. The higher he climbed, the more untouchable he started feeling. Francis thought about the gala, the confidence, the carelessness, the way Austin praised Lila openly in front of his wife. Untouchable. Yes, that was exactly the problem. Nathan looked toward her carefully. "Does he know you know?" "Good." His answer came too fast. Francis narrowed her eyes slightly. "You sound worried." Nathan leaned forward again. "I am worried." The seriousness in his voice unsettled her immediately. Austin's under pressure right now. Internal audits are tightening. Investors are nervous. If he feels threatened personally too, he'll what Nathan hesitated. "I don't know." The uncertainty frightened her more than specifics would have. Nathan rubbed one hand across his face tiredly. "I've worked with Austin for 9 years. He doesn't lose control well." Images flashed through Francis's mind suddenly. Austin monitoring her emotions, building narratives about instability, carefully documenting weakness. Rebecca had warned her already. Men like Austin became dangerous when consequences arrived. Not violent necessarily, but strategic, cold. Nathan glanced toward the flash drive again. "There's enough on there to protect yourself." Francis finally picked it up, small, lightweight, capable of detonating an entire life. "Why are you helping me?" she asked quietly. Nathan met her gaze directly for the first time. "Because what Austin's doing is wrong." Simple answer, honest answer. Frances realized suddenly how long it had been since someone spoke to her without manipulation underneath. Nathan continued softly. "And because everybody in that company knows who actually helped build his career." Emotion tightened unexpectedly in her throat. "You organized every investor dinner, every donor event, every executive retreat. Half the board trusts Austin because they trusted you first." Frances looked down immediately. For years, Austin minimized her contributions so subtly she almost forgot they existed herself. Nathan shook his head slowly. "He never deserved how loyal you were to him." The words landed hard, not because they fixed anything, but because they acknowledged something Austin never did. Her loyalty had value. Silence settled between them briefly. Then Nathan spoke again. "There's something else." Frances stiffened immediately. What Nathan's expression darkened. "Austin's preparing for a promotion review next month." She nodded slowly. "I know. If the board discovers financial misconduct before then." Nathan paused carefully. "Everything collapses." Frances thought she would feel satisfaction hearing that. Instead, she felt grief. Because 12 years ago, she would have destroyed herself helping Austin survive this moment. Now she was sitting across from another man discussing the ruins calmly. Nathan stood as the meeting ended. "Be careful, Frances." She looked up. "I mean it." Something about the seriousness in his voice unsettled her again. Nathan lowered his voice. "Austin's terrified of failure, and terrified people make ugly decisions." Frances held the flash drive tightly inside her purse. Outside the whiskey bar, evening rain had started falling across Chicago again. Nathan paused beside the door. "One last thing." Frances turned. Nathan's expression hardened slightly. "If Austin realizes you're no longer emotionally under his control." He stopped, then finished quietly. "He's going to panic." The sentence followed Frances all the way home, because deep down, she already knew it was true. Evelyn Wells's dining room looked like a museum exhibit designed by someone who hated warmth. Everything gleamed. The silverware reflected candlelight perfectly. Crystal glasses stood aligned with mathematical precision. Fresh white orchids decorated the center of the massive table without a single petal out of place. Nothing in Evelyn's home was ever allowed to look messy, especially family problems. Frances sat quietly beside Austin while servants poured wine around the table. Across from them, Evelyn Wells wore cream silk and diamonds, with the rigid elegance of a woman who treated emotion like weakness. Beside her sat Richard Wells, silent behind his newspaper even during dinner. And at the far end of the table, Carter Wells looked deeply uncomfortable already. Good. At least someone still possessed a conscience. "You've been hard to reach lately," Evelyn said to Frances, while cutting into her sea bass delicately. Translation: "Austin told me something's wrong with you." Frances smiled faintly. "I've been busy." With what Evelyn asked immediately. Austin jumped in before Frances could answer. "She's just overwhelmed lately." There it was again, the narrative. Frances turned slowly toward her husband. "I don't remember saying I was overwhelmed." Austin's smile tightened slightly. "You've seemed stressed." Evelyn sighed softly as though exhausted already. "Well, that's understandable. Austin's under enormous pressure right now." Of course. Everything always circled back to Austin. The family orbited his needs like planets around the sun. Frances set her wineglass down carefully. "What kind of pressure?" Austin glanced at her briefly. "The promotion review." "Ah," Frances said softly. "The promotion." Carter looked up immediately at the tone in her voice. "Interesting. Maybe someone else sensed the tension now, too." Evelyn dabbed her lips with a napkin gracefully. "Men at Austin's level carry responsibilities most women don't fully understand." Frances almost laughed out loud. "Most women!" As if Frances hadn't spent 12 years managing donor crises, investor relationships, political dinners, social disasters, and emotional labor behind Austin's career. But Evelyn never counted invisible work unless a man performed it publicly. "I'm aware of how demanding his career is," Frances replied calmly. Evelyn tilted her head slightly. "Then you also understand why stability at home matters." There it was. The warning. Subtle, polished, sharp as glass. Keep the marriage together. Protect the image. Don't embarrass the family. Austin remained unusually quiet beside Frances now, watching, monitoring. Carter finally spoke up. Frances has done more for this family than anyone gives her credit for. The table went still. Evelyn's eyes moved toward her younger son slowly. Excuse me, Carter leaned back in his chair. I'm just saying she's carried a lot. Austin's jaw tightened faintly. Richard lowered his newspaper slightly for the first time all evening. Evelyn gave Carter a cool smile. What Frances carries is privilege. Frances stared at her mother-in-law in disbelief. Privilege? Interesting word for emotional servitude wrapped in luxury. Evelyn continued smoothly. She lives in a beautiful home, travels the world, attends the best events in the city. Austin has provided extremely well. Provided. As if Frances were an expensive dependent instead of a partner. Something inside her finally snapped quietly. Not explosively, just enough to stop protecting them emotionally. You make it sound transactional, Frances said softly. Evelyn blinked once. Marriage is transactional in many ways. The honesty of it chilled the entire room. Austin shifted immediately. Mother, no, Evelyn interrupted smoothly. Someone should say the truth out loud eventually. Frances stared at her, and suddenly everything made horrible sense. Austin learned love here, in this house. Conditional, strategic, image-based. No wonder he viewed marriage like a business arrangement. Evelyn folded her hands elegantly. Men like Austin sacrifice constantly to build successful lives. Women who benefit from those lives should understand compromise. Compromise. The word tasted rotten now. Frances thought about the messages, the lies, the affairs, the financial manipulation, the plans to portray her as unstable. Compromise apparently meant accepting humiliation quietly. Carter looked disgusted. So cheating's compromise now. Silence detonated across the table. Austin's head snapped toward his brother instantly. Evelyn froze. Richard slowly folded his newspaper completely, and Frances realized immediately they knew, every single one of them. The realization hollowed her out instantly. Not just Austin. The family knew. Maybe not every detail, but enough. Enough to say nothing. Enough to watch her smile through dinners while being publicly disrespected behind closed doors. Austin recovered first. What are you talking about? He asked sharply. Carter laughed bitterly. Oh, come on. Evelyn shot him a warning look. Carter. No, he snapped suddenly. I'm serious. Everybody here acts like Frances is crazy for being unhappy, while Austin runs around with, enough. Austin's voice cut through the room coldly. But it was too late. The truth sat exposed now. Frances looked at Evelyn slowly. You knew. Not even a question. Evelyn sighed softly as though Frances were being difficult. I knew there were complications. Complications. 12 years of marriage reduced to complications. Frances felt physically numb, and nobody thought I deserved honesty. Evelyn's expression hardened slightly. What exactly would honesty accomplish besides destruction? The sentence stunned her, because Evelyn genuinely believed protecting Austin mattered more than protecting truth, more than protecting Frances. Women like Evelyn survive by sacrificing other women first. Austin leaned forward finally. Frances, this conversation is getting ridiculous. She turned toward him slowly. Ridiculous. Not painful. Not devastating. Ridiculous. You brought another woman into our marriage, Frances said quietly. The entire table froze. Austin's face changed instantly. There it was. The moment. No more pretending. No more uncertainty. Pure exposure. I see her. What Richard muttered. Austin stared at Frances carefully now. Dangerously carefully. How long have you known his voice had gone frighteningly calm? Frances noticed Evelyn watching her like a strategist evaluating damage. Not a mother concerned for her daughter-in-law. A strategist. Long enough, Frances answered. Austin leaned back slowly. You went through my phone. The accusation almost made her laugh. Not, I'm sorry, not I hurt you. Just violation of his privacy. You slept with another woman in our lake house, Frances said. For the first time all evening, Austin actually looked shaken. Carter muttered, Jesus Christ. Evelyn closed her eyes briefly. Austin lowered his voice. This isn't the place. No, Frances replied calmly. Apparently the place was donor galas, corporate trips, In my own marriage. Francis. Did you laugh about me together? Austin flinched, almost invisibly. That tiny reaction answered everything. Pain ripped through her chest so violently, she nearly lost composure. But she refused to cry here. Not in front of these people. Evelyn finally stepped in again. You need to think carefully before blowing up your life emotionally. Francis looked at her in disbelief. My life, not Austin's choices. Her reaction, always her reaction. Evelyn continued firmly. Affairs are unfortunate, but public scandal destroys families permanently. There it was, the family motto. Protect appearances at all costs, even if women bleed quietly behind them. Frances rose slowly from her chair. Austin stood immediately too. Where are you going? She looked directly into his eyes for the first time without love, softening the edges. And suddenly Austin noticed it. Really noticed it. The emotional attachment was disappearing. Panic flickered behind his composure for half a second. Home, Frances said quietly. Austin stepped closer. We should talk privately. Interesting. Not denial anymore. Not outrage. Damage control. Frances picked up her purse calmly, then looked once around the table. At Evelyn's cold elegance. At Richard's silence. At Carter's guilt. At Austin's fear finally beginning to surface. And she understood something clearly. This family didn't protect love. They protected power. Frances pulled her phone from her purse. Then, while standing in the middle of the Wells dining room, she opened Rebecca Sloane's contact information. Austin saw the screen instantly. His face lost color. Frances! But she was already dialing. Rebecca answered on the second ring. Rebecca Sloane. Frances never looked away from Austin as she spoke. File everything tomorrow morning. Silence crashed across the room. Austin stared at her like he no longer recognized the woman standing in front of him. Good. Because Frances barely recognized herself anymore either. Austin Wells was served divorce papers at 9:12 a.m. on a Tuesday morning in front of 12 executives and 2 senior investors. Frances knew the exact time because Rebecca texted her personally. He's been served. 3 words. Cold, clean, final. Frances stared at the message while sunlight poured through the kitchen windows of the house she no longer emotionally belonged to. For a moment, she expected herself to panic, to cry, to shake, to feel guilty. Instead, she felt something unfamiliar. Stillness. The kind that arrived after surviving the worst thing imaginable. Her phone buzzed again immediately. Austin. She let it ring. Again, again, again. By the 5th call, she simply turned the phone face down on the marble counter and continued drinking her coffee. Upstairs, half her closet stood empty already. Rebecca had moved fast, too fast for Austin to regain control. The previous night, emergency filings froze several shared financial accounts, pending investigation. Rebecca also filed requests for forensic review connected to suspicious transfers tied to Halstead Capital. The legal pressure hit like a controlled explosion, strategic, precise. Exactly the way Austin used to operate against other people. Funny how terrified powerful men became when strategy was used against them. Frances heard a car pull violently into the driveway outside. Too early. Her stomach tightened instantly. Austin! The front door slammed hard enough to shake the walls. Frances. His voice thundered through the house. Not polished now, not charming. Panicked. She remained seated at the kitchen island calmly while footsteps stormed toward her across the hardwood floors. Austin appeared moments later, still wearing his suit from the office tie, loosened aggressively, face pale with fury. What the hell did you do? There he was, the real version. Not smooth, not controlled, not charismatic, just a man losing power publicly for the first time in his life. Frances looked up slowly from her coffee. Good morning. Austin stared at her in disbelief. You froze our accounts. Our accounts, she repeated softly. You know exactly what I mean. His breathing was uneven now. Interesting. Austin Wells hated unpredictability, and Frances had just become unpredictable. She folded her hands calmly. You cheated on me for almost a year. Austin laughed sharply in frustration. So this is revenge. No, Frances replied quietly. This is consequences. The sentence hit him visibly. Austin ran both hands through his hair aggressively. You filed a forensic financial review. Yes. Jesus Christ, Francis. There it was again. Not sorrow, not shame, fear, professional fear. You're trying to destroy me, he snapped. Francis looked at him for a long moment. No, Austin. Her voice remained terrifyingly calm. You did that yourself. He paced across the kitchen like a trapped animal, suddenly realizing the cage door had closed behind him. You have no idea what you've triggered. Interesting choice of words. Triggered, not hurt, not heartbreak. Damage. Austin turned toward her again. The board's already involved. I know. His eyes narrowed immediately. What does that mean? Francis said nothing. And somehow her silence scared him more. His voice lowered dangerously. Who have you been talking to? There it was. Control again. Always information control. Francis stood slowly from the kitchen stool. You should be more worried about who your CFO's talking to. Austin froze completely. For the first time since entering the house, genuine fear flashed openly across his face. Nathan. Good. Now he understood how serious this had become. Austin approached her slowly. What exactly did Nathan tell you? Francis held his gaze. Enough. The silence between them thickened instantly. Austin's jaw flexed hard. He had no right. Francis almost laughed. No right, she repeated. That's your concern right now. Austin's voice sharpened. You don't understand how these things work. No, she snapped suddenly. I understand perfectly now. Finally. Anger cracked through. Years of emotional exhaustion erupted beneath her skin all at once. I understand you slept with another woman while I built your life around you. Her voice trembled now. I understand you mocked me behind my back. I understand you planned to paint me as unstable while hiding money through your company. Austin looked genuinely stunned. Because she knew everything, not pieces, everything. You went through my files. You went through our marriage with a flamethrower. He flinched. Good. For once, let the truth hit him properly. Austin exhaled heavily and suddenly changed tactics completely. The shift was so fast it almost made her sick. His shoulders lowered. His expression softened. His voice gentled. Manipulation mode. Francis, he said quietly, I made mistakes. Mistakes. The affair. The lies. The financial manipulation. The psychological setup. Mistakes. Tears almost burned behind her eyes from sheer disbelief. You don't get to minimize this anymore. Austin stepped closer carefully. I never wanted to hurt you. The sentence detonated something inside her. Francis laughed. Actually laughed. Sharp. Broken. Furious. You brought your mistress into our lake house. Austin went silent. You let me host events while you slept with her behind my back. Francis's breathing shook now. You let me defend you to people while you planned my replacement. Austin looked away briefly. Guilt, finally. Tiny. Cowardly. Too late. I got lost, he muttered quietly. Francis stared at him. Lost. Men always called betrayal confusion once consequences arrived. You weren't lost, she whispered. You were selfish. The truth landed brutally between them. Austin's expression hardened again instantly. There are things bigger than our marriage at stake now. And there it was, the real fear, not losing her, losing status, career, money, reputation. Francis suddenly saw everything clearly. Austin didn't love people. He loved stability, admiration, control. And Francis had provided all three until she became inconvenient. His phone started ringing suddenly. Lila. The name flashed brightly across the screen. The silence inside the kitchen became deadly. Austin declined the call immediately. Too fast, too guilty. Francis felt something inside her finally die completely. Not love, hope. Austin looked exhausted suddenly. This has spiraled too far. No, Francis said quietly. It finally reached the truth. Another call buzzed instantly, this time from someone labeled Board Chair Martin Keller. Austin closed his eyes briefly. Panic, real panic now. He answered immediately. Martin. A long silence followed while Austin listened. Francis watched the color slowly drain from his face. Yes, I understand. No, that's not accurate. I can explain the reimbursements. There it was, the beginning of collapse. Austin turned away from her completely while lowering his voice. Francis walked upstairs quietly during the call. Their bedroom looked untouched, elegant, beautiful, dead. She opened the closet slowly. Most of her clothes were already gone. Rebecca's team had moved essential belongings that morning into temporary storage in a private apartment downtown. Frances reached for the final suitcase resting near the bed, then paused. Austin's voice echoed faintly downstairs. Angry now. Desperate. For years she would have rushed downstairs trying to calm him, protect him, save him from stress. Instead, she zipped the suitcase closed. A few minutes later, Austin stormed into the bedroom, then stopped cold, because the closet was half empty. Frances. For the first time all day, his voice cracked emotionally. Not strategically. Emotionally. The reality was finally hitting him. She was leaving. Really leaving. Frances lifted the suitcase calmly. Austin stared at her like a man watching his life collapse in real time. "Don't do this," he whispered. She looked at him quietly, then at the wedding photo sitting on the dresser behind him. Two people smiling at a future neither of them truly understood. "I already did," Frances said softly, and then she walked past him toward the door while Austin Wells stood frozen inside the ruins of the life he destroyed himself. The apartment smelled like fresh paint, expensive linen candles, and silence. Real silence. Not the tense kind that lived inside the Wells house for years. Not the kind filled with unsaid things and emotional landmines. This silence felt unfamiliar, almost holy. Frances stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking downtown Chicago, while evening lights flickered alive beneath the rain. 34 floors above the city, everything looked smaller, including her old life. Rebecca had arranged the apartment quickly through a private property contact. Luxury building, secure entrance, confidential lease. "Austin won't find you easily here," she said. At the time, Frances thought the comment sounded dramatic. Now she understood. Austin had called 19 times in 2 days, texted 37. Voicemails ranged from apologetic to furious to strangely emotional. The emotional ones disturbed her most. Because even now, part of her still reacted automatically to his pain. Trauma didn't disappear just because truth arrived. Her phone buzzed again against the kitchen counter. Austin. Frances stared at the screen until it stopped ringing. Then she turned the phone face down again. Outside, thunder rolled faintly across the skyline. Inside the apartment, unopened boxes lined the walls around furniture. Rebecca's assistant had rushed into place. Clothes still hung half-packed inside garment bags. Nothing felt fully real yet. Frances walked slowly through the unfamiliar rooms. Living room, kitchen, bedroom, her bedroom. The thought hit strangely. Mine, not ours, mine. For years, every major decision in her life revolved around Austin's preferences, Austin's schedule, Austin's comfort. Even their old house barely reflected her tastes anymore. Somewhere along the way, Frances stopped asking herself what she liked. The realization hurt almost more than the affair, because betrayal could wound a woman, but self-erasure destroyed her slowly. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was Rebecca. Frances answered immediately. "How bad is it?" Rebecca didn't waste time. "The board launched preliminary internal review this morning." Frances leaned against the kitchen island. And Austin's terrified. Good. The thought arrived instinctively now, not because she enjoyed suffering, because for years, only Frances suffered consequences while Austin avoided them completely. Rebecca continued. Nathan Bennett formally cooperated with investigators. Frances closed her eyes briefly. That explained the panic. Austin probably viewed Nathan's cooperation as betrayal. Interesting. Men who cheated often called accountability betrayal. "Lila Mercer hired separate counsel this afternoon," Rebecca added. Frances frowned slightly. "She's protecting herself." "Exactly." A humorless laugh escaped Frances softly. Of course she was. The great love story suddenly looked much less romantic once legal exposure entered the room. Rebecca's tone softened slightly. "How are you holding up?" The question caught Frances off guard. Nobody had asked her that sincerely in a very long time. She looked around the apartment slowly. "I don't know yet." And it was true. She wasn't okay, not even close. But beneath the grief, something else was beginning to emerge too. Space. Rebecca hesitated briefly before speaking again. "There's something else." Frances's stomach tightened immediately. What now? Austin's attorney contacted me. Of course he already hired one. Austin never entered battles emotionally, only strategically. What does he want? A meeting. Frances laughed bitterly. He wants damage control. Yes. Rebecca's voice sharpened slightly, and probably reconciliation optics before things worsen professionally. That sentence landed hard. Reconciliation optics. Not reconciliation. Image management. God. Everything with Austin eventually became transactional. Tell him no, Frances said quietly. I already did. After hanging up, Frances wandered toward the bedroom again. Rain streaked softly against the windows while distant traffic hummed below. And suddenly the adrenaline disappeared, all of it, the strategy, the anger, the survival mode, gone, leaving only grief behind, real grief, the kind that hollowed bones. Frances sank slowly onto the edge of the bed and covered her mouth as the first sob finally escaped her chest. It came violently, without elegance, without control. For nearly 2 weeks she had functioned like someone emotionally anesthetized, organizing evidence, meeting attorneys, surviving humiliation. But now there was no audience, no Austin to monitor, no Wells family demanding composure, just her, and the unbearable reality that the marriage she built her entire adult life around had been dying quietly while she kept trying to save it alone. Tears blurred the skyline outside. Frances cried for the woman she used to be, the hopeful 28-year-old who married Austin believing loyalty guaranteed safety, the ambitious consultant who slowly abandoned herself to become supportive, the wife who defended a man actively betraying her. She cried until her chest physically hurt, then cried harder when she realized something devastating. Even now, part of her still missed him, not the real Austin, the version she believed existed, the man who once danced with her barefoot in their first apartment kitchen while eating takeout at midnight, the man who held her after her father died, the man who promised it'll always be us. Maybe that man existed once, or maybe Frances simply loved hard enough for both of them. Hours passed before she finally stood again. Her face looked exhausted in the bathroom mirror, but clearer somehow, more honest. She washed her makeup off slowly and changed into oversized pajamas before wandering back into the kitchen. The city glowed outside like another universe entirely. Her phone buzzed once more. Unknown number. Frances hesitated before answering. Hello, Frances Carter. She stiffened slightly. What do you want? A pause. Then Carter exhaled heavily. I deserved that. Frances stayed silent. Carter struggled for words. I wanted to say I'm sorry. Her chest tightened unexpectedly. For what exactly? For not saying something sooner. Rain tapped softly against the windows while Carter continued. I didn't know everything at first, but I knew enough. Enough. Always enough. Did everybody know? Frances asked quietly. No. Carter answered immediately. My father barely pays attention to anything emotional, but my mother suspected, and still protected Austin. Of course she did. Carter's voice lowered. She told Austin to handle it carefully. Frances closed her eyes painfully. Not stop, not confess. Handle it carefully, like she was a public relations issue instead of a human being. I'm sorry, Carter repeated softly. You didn't deserve any of this. Emotion climbed into her throat again unexpectedly, because unlike Austin's apologies, Carter sounded genuinely ashamed. Thank you, she whispered. Silence lingered briefly between them. Then Carter spoke carefully. For what it's worth, Austin's falling apart. Frances stared at the skyline. A strange ache moved through her chest. Not satisfaction, just sadness. Because once upon a time hearing Austin was hurting would have destroyed her. Now she simply felt tired. He should have thought about that earlier, she said quietly. Yes, Carter replied softly. He should have. After the call ended, Frances opened one of the moving boxes near the kitchen. Inside sat old frame photos and work portfolios from her consulting years. She pulled one folder free absent-mindedly. Morrison Hospitality Strategy Group, a project she completed 7 years ago before abandoning her career almost entirely. Her phone buzzed again immediately, this time email notification, subject line consulting opportunity, immediate interest. Frances frowned and opened it. A former client, Daniel Morrison. She read the message twice in disbelief. I recently heard you may be available for independent consulting work again. If true, I'd love to discuss a major development project with you personally. Frances stared at the screen silently. For years, she believed she had disappeared professionally. that the world moved on without her, but maybe she hadn't vanished. Maybe she had only been buried beneath Austin's shadow too long. Outside the windows, lightning flashed across Chicago's skyline, and for the first time since leaving the Wells house, Frances felt something unfamiliar begin to stir beneath the grief. Not revenge, not anger, possibility. Then movement below the building caught her eye. A black car parked across the street. Driver standing outside beneath the rain. Tall figure, dark coat, watching the building. Frances's stomach dropped instantly, because even 34 floors above the city, she recognized Austin immediately. Austin stayed outside her building for almost 2 hours. Frances watched him from 34 floors above while rain soaked his dark coat and blurred the city lights around him. He stood beside his car with one hand in his pocket, staring upward like a man hoping guilt alone might reopen a locked door. 3 weeks ago, that image would have shattered her. Now it only made her tired. Her phone buzzed again. Austin. Then another message. Please just talk to me. Another. I'm losing everything. Frances stared at the words quietly. Interesting. Not I miss you. Not I hurt you. I'm losing everything. Even now, his language revolved around possession. Carefully, she locked the phone and stepped away from the window. Because Rebecca was right. Austin was panicking, and panicked men became unpredictable. The next morning, Chicago business media exploded quietly, not publicly enough for headlines yet, but inside corporate circles everyone knew. Halstead Capital's internal review had expanded. Investors were nervous. Board members were distancing themselves. Financial compliance officers had begun examining reimbursement trails connected to donor relations spending. And somewhere in the center of the collapse sat Austin Wells, once untouchable, now suddenly radioactive. Frances learned all of this while sitting inside a downtown cafe reviewing consulting proposals from Daniel Morrison. The irony almost amused her. While Austin's career burned, hers was slowly breathing again. Your analysis work still holds up beautifully. Frances looked up from the portfolio. Daniel Morrison smiled warmly across the table. Mid-50s, intelligent eyes, the kind of man who listened fully before speaking. Years ago, Daniel offered Frances a senior strategy position. Austin convinced her to decline it. At some point, Austin told her back then, one of us has to prioritize the marriage. Funny how that sacrifice only flowed one direction. You really think so? Frances asked quietly. Daniel looked genuinely confused. Frances, you were one of the best consultants I ever worked with. Emotion caught unexpectedly in her chest. Not because of the compliment, because she realized how long it had been since anyone spoke about her capabilities without attaching Austin's name first. Daniel leaned forward slightly. I heard things have been difficult personally. Corporate translation, everyone knows. Frances stirred her coffee slowly. That obvious Daniel hesitated carefully. Chicago finance circles aren't exactly subtle, of course they weren't. Wealthy communities treated scandal like entertainment wrapped in sympathy. Frances could already imagine the whispers. Poor Frances. Austin embarrassed her publicly. I always suspected something. She should have left sooner. The last one would hurt most, because they'd be right. Daniel shifted the conversation gently. The position still stands, by the way. Frances blinked. What? You'd lead strategic restructuring for our expansion project. He smiled faintly. And before you ask, no, this isn't pity. Something inside her loosened emotionally, because for the first time in weeks, someone was offering her a future instead of discussing her collapse. Before she could answer, her phone buzzed again. This time it was Rebecca. Frances excused herself quickly and stepped outside onto the sidewalk. What happened? Rebecca got straight to the point. Lila Mercer hired separate representation and began cooperating internally. Frances froze. She turned on him. She turned on self-preservation. Fair enough. Rebecca continued walking somewhere on the other end of the line, heels clicking sharply. Apparently, Austin assured her the financial overlap would never become traceable. Frances almost laughed. God. Arrogant men always believed rules stopped applying to them eventually. What does this mean? It means Austin's exposed from multiple directions now. Traffic roared softly around Frances, while cold wind swept through downtown. Has he contacted you again? Constantly. Rebecca sighed softly. Be careful. Men facing professional collapse sometimes become emotionally desperate. Frances looked up at the gray Chicago skyline. He already is. And he was. The voicemails alone proved it. Some were furious, others sounded broken. One arrived at 2:11 a.m., while Austin was clearly drunk. Frances, please, I know you hate me right now, but don't let them destroy me. Them. Not I destroyed myself. Them. Always external blame. Always somebody else. Back inside the cafe, Daniel waited patiently while Frances gathered herself. You okay? She nodded automatically, then stopped. No, she admitted quietly. Daniel's expression softened slightly. You don't have to be okay immediately. The kindness almost hurt. Frances had spent so long performing emotional composure that honesty felt unnatural now. Daniel slid a contract folder gently toward her. Take time to think about it. She looked down at the paperwork, her name typed neatly across the top. Not Mrs. Austin Wells, not donor liaison, not supportive spouse. Frances Wells, independent consultant. The sight alone nearly made her cry. That afternoon, Austin's collapse accelerated publicly. Nathan Bennett formally submitted internal documentation to the board. Lila Mercer distanced herself completely from Austin in private communications that quickly leaked through executive circles, and by evening, one devastating rumor spread through Chicago finance communities. Austin Wells might lose the promotion entirely. Frances heard the news from Carter. He showed up unexpectedly outside her building carrying coffee and exhaustion. You look terrible, she told him honestly. Carter laughed bitterly. You should see Austin. They sat in the apartment kitchen while rain battered the windows again. Chicago seemed determined to drown with them lately. He's blaming everybody, Carter admitted quietly. Of course he is. He thinks Nathan sabotaged him. Frances looked down at her coffee. No, Nathan exposed him. Carter nodded slowly. Yeah. Silence settled briefly. Then Carter sighed heavily. My mother still thinks this can somehow be fixed. Frances almost smiled. Your mother thinks appearances matter more than reality. That's true. Carter hesitated carefully before continuing. But Austin! His voice trailed off. What about him? Carter rubbed both hands across his face tiredly. I've never seen him like this. Part of Frances wanted to ask if Austin was eating, sleeping, functioning, muscle memory. Years of emotional caretaking didn't disappear overnight. She hated that part of herself still existed. Carter looked toward the city windows quietly. He actually loved you, you know. The sentence hit her strangely, because maybe it was true. In whatever broken, selfish way Austin understood love, but love without loyalty eventually became emotional violence. He loved what I did for him, Frances answered softly. Carter didn't argue, because deep down he knew she was right. As evening settled across the city, Carter finally stood to leave. At the door he paused awkwardly. One more thing. Frances waited. Carter looked uncomfortable suddenly. Austin's trying to meet with you privately. Her stomach tightened. He already knows I won't. He's desperate. The word echoed unpleasantly. Desperate men were dangerous. Rebecca warned her already. What exactly does he want? Frances asked quietly. Carter hesitated. I think he finally realized you're actually gone. After he left, Frances wandered back toward the windows, overlooking Chicago. Night had fallen fully now. Thousands of lights stretched endlessly beneath the storm clouds. Beautiful, lonely, alive. Her phone buzzed once more, this time a single text from Austin. No manipulation, no anger, no strategy, just one sentence. I should have been terrified of losing you long before now. Frances stared at the message for a very long time, then slowly locked the screen again, because maybe Austin finally understood her value. But understanding it after destroying her didn't change what he had done. Frances agreed to meet Austin on a Thursday evening exactly 6 weeks after leaving him. Not because she missed him, because she was finally no longer afraid of him emotionally. That was the strange thing about heartbreak. At first it felt like drowning. Then one day quietly you realized you could breathe again, without the person who once felt essential. Rebecca hated the idea immediately. He's unstable right now, she warned over the phone. I know. Frances, I'm serious. So am I. Silence lingered briefly. Then Rebecca sighed. Public place. 1 hour maximum. And if he starts manipulating the conversation, leave. Frances almost smiled. He's going to manipulate the conversation. Fair point. They chose a quiet restaurant overlooking Lake Michigan, Expensive enough for privacy, dim enough to hide emotion. Austin was already there when Frances arrived, and for a moment, the sight of him shocked her. Not because he looked handsome, because he looked diminished. The confidence that once entered rooms before him was gone. His suit still fit perfectly, but exhaustion clung to him now. Dark circles shadowed his eyes. His posture looked heavier somehow. Consequences had finally reached him physically. Austin stood immediately when he saw her. "Hi." His voice cracked slightly. Frances sat across from him carefully. "Hi." For a few seconds, neither spoke. The waiter arrived. Frances ordered sparkling water. Austin ordered whiskey immediately. Of course he did. Stress had always made Austin reach for control or alcohol. Tonight, he seemed to be losing both. "You look good," he said quietly. Frances ignored the comment. "What did you want to say?" Austin stared at the table briefly before answering. "I don't even know where to start." "Interesting." A man who manipulated every conversation suddenly claimed he lacked words. Frances folded her hands calmly. "Try honesty." The sentence landed sharply. Austin nodded slowly. "I deserve that." Silence again. Then finally I screwed up. Frances almost laughed. There it was, the universal understatement of selfish men everywhere. You cheated, you lied, you manipulated finances, you planned psychological narratives against your wife, but somehow it became I screwed up. Austin rubbed both hands together anxiously. "What happened with Lila?" He exhaled heavily. "It got out of control." Frances stared at him. Out of control, as if the affair happened accidentally for 11 months. As opposed to intentionally, she asked softly. Austin winced slightly. "I'm trying here, Frances." "No," she replied calmly. "You're panicking." That hit him directly. His eyes lifted toward hers sharply. Frances leaned back slightly. "You're not here because you suddenly respect me. You're here because your career is collapsing." Austin looked wounded instantly. "That's not fair." "No." Her voice remained calm. "Would you be sitting here if the board promoted you successfully and nobody discovered the financial misconduct?" Silence. Dead silence. And there it was, the answer. Austin looked away first. Frances felt something inside her finally settle completely. Not anger. Clarity. Because for weeks part of her still wondered if maybe he truly loved her underneath all the selfishness. But love revealed itself most honestly during consequences. And Austin's first instinct had never been protecting her. Only himself. "I did love you," he said quietly. Past tense. "Interesting." Frances studied him carefully. When exactly, Austin frowned slightly. "What?" "When did you love me?" she asked softly. "While sleeping with another woman, while mocking me in texts, while planning to portray me as unstable." Pain flashed across his face. "Good. Let him sit inside the truth for once." "You read everything," he whispered. "Yes." Austin closed his eyes briefly. "I never meant for you to see those messages." The sentence hit her like ice water. Not regret over saying them, regret over exposure. Frances almost pitied him. "You know what the worst part was?" she asked quietly. Austin looked up slowly. It wasn't the cheating. His expression shifted. It was realizing how little empathy you had for me while I was loving you. The honesty in her voice shattered something between them. Austin's eyes reddened slightly. For the first time he looked genuinely emotional, rather than defensive. "I was unhappy," he admitted quietly. Frances nodded once. "I know. You and I became—" He struggled for words. "Routine." There it was. The justification. Frances almost smiled sadly. "You mean safe?" Austin blinked. "You became addicted to excitement and validation," she continued softly. "And instead of communicating honestly, you chose betrayal." Austin stared at her silently. Because she understood him now. Completely. And manipulative people hated being seen clearly. "I hated myself," sometimes he whispered. Frances looked out toward the dark lake beyond the windows. "Did you? Yes. But not enough to stop." Silence again. Austin took a long drink of whiskey. "The board suspended my promotion review yesterday." There it was. The real wound. Frances said nothing. "Lila's cooperating with investigators." Again she stayed silent. Austin laughed bitterly. "She turned on me immediately." Frances almost responded, "Just like you turned on me." But she was too emotionally tired for cruelty now. Instead, she asked quietly, "Did you love her?" Austin looked genuinely confused by the question. Then he answered softly, I don't know. And strangely, Frances believed him, because people like Austin often confused desire, ego, and escape for love. Real love required accountability, sacrifice, integrity, things Austin only valued when he risked losing them. I miss you, he said suddenly. The sentence lingered heavily between them, and once upon a time hearing it would have broken Frances completely. Now it mostly made her sad, because he missed her after destroying her, like grief only mattered once it inconvenienced him personally. Austin leaned forward slightly. I know I don't deserve another chance. Correct, but I'd spend the rest of my life trying to fix this if you let me. Frances stared at him quietly. There it was, the fantasy ending, the emotional plea, the broken man realizing too late what he lost. Movies taught women this moment was romantic. Reality made it tragic, because she once would have accepted crumbs just to keep being chosen. Not anymore. Austin, she said softly, you didn't lose me overnight. His breathing slowed. You lost me every time I begged for emotional connection, and you dismissed me. Her voice trembled slightly now. You lost me every time you made me feel like loving you was asking for too much. Austin's eyes filled slowly. You lost me long before I found the texts. Tears slipped down his face suddenly. Real tears. And somehow that hurt more than the affair itself. Because now he understood. Now he saw her value. Now he recognized her loyalty, but only after she stopped offering it. I'm sorry, he whispered brokenly. Frances believed he meant it, truly, and that was the cruelest part of all, because sincere regret still didn't undo destruction. She stood slowly from the table. Austin looked panicked instantly. Please don't go like this. Frances picked up her coat calmly. You already taught me what staying looks like. The sentence hollowed him visibly. He reached for her hand instinctively. Frances looked down at his fingers, then gently stepped back. Not angry, not dramatic, just done. Austin stared at her like a man watching the last remaining piece of his life disappear, and maybe he was. Because as Frances walked away from the table, she realized something quietly devastating. She no longer wanted revenge anymore. She just wanted peace. The glass doors read Frances Wells and Associates Financial Recovery and Strategic Consulting. Frances stood across the street staring at the lettering while early morning sunlight spilled across downtown Chicago. For a long moment, she simply looked at her own name, not Mrs. Austin Wells, not event host, not supportive wife, just Frances. The first time she signed the office lease, her hands trembled so badly she nearly dropped the pen, not from fear of failure, from disbelief that she was finally building something that belonged entirely to her. 6 months had passed since the night she found the texts. 6 months since her entire life detonated quietly inside a luxury kitchen. And somehow, against every expectation, Frances felt more like herself now than she had in years. Are you going to stand out here dramatically all morning? Frances turned laughing softly. Rebecca Sloan approached carrying 2 coffees and wearing another razor-sharp charcoal suit. Her blonde hair remained perfectly controlled despite Chicago wind. How long have you been watching me? Frances asked. Long enough to know you're spiraling sentimentally again. Rebecca handed her a coffee cup. Frances smiled warmly. Somewhere between legal strategy meetings and emotional collapse, Rebecca Sloan became one of the closest friends she'd ever had. Funny how destruction sometimes introduced you to the right people. They crossed the street together toward the office building. Inside the new workspace buzzed softly with quiet energy. Minimalist furniture, warm lighting, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, professional, elegant, alive. Frances still couldn't believe it existed. Her first clients arrived unexpectedly. Women, always women. Women rebuilding after divorce. Women recovering financially after emotional manipulation. Women who spent years sacrificing careers, confidence, and independence for relationships that eventually consumed them. And Frances understood them instinctively. Not from textbooks, from survival. Morning boss. Frances turned toward her assistant, Maya Hernandez, who balanced folders against one hip while texting simultaneously. 29. Brilliant, efficient, completely unimpressed by wealthy men. Frances adored her instantly. Please stop calling me boss like we're in a legal drama. Maya smirked. You literally hired a former litigator and named your company after yourself. Fair point. Rebecca disappeared toward the conference room while Frances moved through the office slowly. Her office. Every time the thought appeared, it still startled her. The divorce proceedings were nearing final stages now. Austin's attorneys had shifted from aggression to negotiation weeks earlier, after forensic audits uncovered enough financial misconduct to terrify everyone involved. Halstead Capital publicly announced Austin's resignation effective immediately. Privately, he'd been forced out, the promotion vanished, the board distanced itself, industry relationships evaporated, Chicago finance circles moved fast when blood entered the water. And Lila Mercer gone, she relocated to New York almost immediately after cooperating with investigators. Frances never contacted her, never needed to. Some endings exhausted themselves naturally. Maya approached again carefully. There's something you should probably see. Frances frowned slightly. That sounds ominous. Maya handed over a business file. The logo on the front made Frances pause instantly. Brennan and Cole Executive Consulting. She knew that company, everyone did. High-level corporate placement firm specializing in damaged executive reputations. Her stomach tightened slightly. What about them? Maya hesitated. They're pursuing partnership contracts with us for financial rehabilitation consulting. Frances blinked, then noticed the attached executive profile beneath the folder. Austin Wells. Silence filled the room instantly. Of course life would eventually become ironic enough for this moment. Frances stared at Austin's profile photo quietly. Still handsome, still polished, but his eyes looked different now, older somehow. Like consequences aged people unevenly. Maya shifted awkwardly. I can decline immediately. Frances looked up slowly, and for one dangerous second, revenge tempted her. Real revenge. Not emotional speeches or legal filings. Power. Austin Wells. The man who once believed she'd never survive without him now applying for professional opportunities connected to her company. The universe almost seemed cruelly poetic. You okay? Maya asked carefully. Frances exhaled slowly. Months ago, she would have wanted to destroy him publicly. Now she just felt tired. No, Frances said honestly. But I will be. Maya waited. Frances closed the folder calmly. We'll handle it professionally. That answer surprised even her. Because healing wasn't dramatic the way revenge fantasies promised. Healing was quieter. More exhausting. It required releasing bitterness even when bitterness felt justified. Later that afternoon, Carter Wells stopped by unexpectedly carrying flowers. Before you panic, he said immediately, they're congratulatory, not manipulative. Frances laughed despite herself. Carter had changed over the last several months too. More honest, less passive. Pain forced growth onto entire families sometimes. These are beautiful, she said softly. Carter looked around the office slowly. You built all this fast. Frances shrugged lightly. Turns out emotional devastation is weirdly motivating. Carter smiled sadly. Then his expression shifted. He saw the company website. Frances stiffened slightly. Austin. Of course. And Carter hesitated. He cried. The room went quiet, not because Frances wanted him suffering, because part of her still remembered loving him deeply enough to hate imagining him broken. Carter sat across from her carefully. He knows now, he said quietly, knows that you were never the weak one. Emotion tightened unexpectedly in Frances's throat. For years, she believed kindness made her vulnerable. But kindness wasn't weakness. Staying soft inside cruelty required enormous strength. I spent so much time trying to be enough for him, she admitted quietly. Carter shook his head immediately. No, Austin spent years failing someone extraordinary. The sincerity in his voice almost hurt, because validation arriving after destruction always carried sadness too. Frances looked out the office windows toward the skyline. I don't hate him anymore. Carter seemed surprised. Really? She thought about it carefully. No. A pause. I think I finally just see him clearly. And that was different. Hatred still chained people emotionally. Clarity set them free. After Carter left, Frances remained alone in the office while evening settled across Chicago. The city lights flickered on slowly below. Beautiful, endless, full of people surviving things nobody else could see. Her phone buzzed quietly. Unknown number. Frances answered cautiously. Hello? A pause. Then Austin's voice. Soft, careful, unsteady. I heard about the office. Frances closed her eyes briefly. Carter told you. Yeah. Silence stretched. Then Austin spoke again. I'm proud of you. The words landed strangely. Once upon a time, hearing that from him would have meant everything. Now it simply felt late. Thank you, she said politely. Another silence. Then, you know what the worst part is. Frances didn't answer. Austin laughed softly without humor. I spent years thinking success meant becoming untouchable. His voice cracked slightly. Turns out the only real thing in my life was you. Emotion moved painfully through her chest, because maybe he finally meant every word. But timing mattered, and love arriving after destruction often became grief instead. You should have realized that before you broke us, she whispered. Austin inhaled shakily. I know. For a moment neither spoke, then Frances looked around her office one final time. Her name on the walls, her work on the tables, her future waiting quietly around her. And suddenly she understood something fully. Moving on wasn't about making Austin suffer, it was about no longer needing his recognition to understand her worth. Goodbye, Austin. His breathing caught softly on the other end, then quietly goodbye, Frances. She ended the call gently, and for the first time in years, she felt completely free. The rain had stopped by the time Frances Wells stepped out of her office. Chicago looked different now. Not softer, not kinder, just clearer, like a world that no longer had to pretend she didn't exist. Her company had been officially operational for 3 weeks, but tonight marked something different. Closure. The final divorce settlement had been signed that afternoon. No dramatic courtroom battle, no televised scandal, no emotional collapse, just signatures. Quiet, permanent, irreversible. Frances stood on the sidewalk outside her building holding the folder that ended 12 years of marriage. The city lights reflected faintly in the glass windows above her name, Frances Wells and Associates. This time it didn't feel surreal, it felt earned. Her phone buzzed once in her hand. A message from Rebecca, it's done. You're officially free. Frances stared at the words for a long time. Free, a word she used to associate with fear. Because freedom meant uncertainty, and uncertainty used to terrify her more than betrayal ever could. Now it felt like oxygen. She exhaled slowly and put the phone away. Inside her apartment that evening, Frances didn't rush to celebrate. She didn't pour champagne immediately. She didn't call anyone. Instead, she cooked dinner. Something simple, something quiet, a ritual she used to perform out of obligation, now done entirely for herself. As she chopped vegetables, she noticed how natural her movements felt. No anxiety about timing Austin's return home. No anticipation of criticism. No emotional monitoring of another person's mood. Just silence. Her own. The apartment felt different tonight, not empty, just hers. At 7:42 p.m., the doorbell rang. Frances paused. Rebecca had a key. Maya usually texted first. She wiped her hands slowly and opened the door. Carter Wells stood there holding a bottle of wine and looking slightly uncomfortable. You're becoming predictable, Frances said softly. Carter smiled faintly. That's the nicest insult I've gotten all week. He stepped inside, carefully glancing around the apartment like he still couldn't believe she lived here alone. You're really okay, he asked. Frances considered the question honestly. For the first time, she didn't default to survival answers. No, she said. Carter nodded slowly. But I will be, she added. That seemed to satisfy him. He placed the wine on the counter. I thought you might not want to be alone tonight. Frances studied him for a moment. Carter Wells had changed in the past months too. Less passive, less performative, less afraid of his own family. You didn't have to come, she said gently. I know, he replied. That's why I did. Something warm moved quietly in her chest. Not romantic, not nostalgic, human. They sat at the small dining table while Frances finished cooking. For a while they talked about nothing important. Work, weather, traffic, normal things, safe things. Then Carter leaned back slightly. He moved out of the city, he said suddenly. Frances didn't ask who. She already knew. Austin, where she asked quietly. Seattle, some interim advisory role. Frances nodded slowly. It didn't surprise her. Men like Austin didn't know how to sit still with consequences. They relocated them. Carter studied her carefully. He asked about you. Frances kept her eyes on her plate, and Carter hesitated. I think he still doesn't understand how you became this version of yourself. Frances let out a soft, tired breath. I didn't become anything new, she said quietly. I just stopped shrinking. That sentence hung in the air between them. Simple, true, uncomfortable for anyone who benefited from her silence before. Carter nodded slowly. I think he finally understands what he lost. Frances finally looked up. Loss requires awareness, she said gently. Austin was always aware of himself first. Carter smiled faintly at that. Fair. After dinner, Carter helped clean up without being asked. It felt oddly domestic in a way that didn't hurt. Before leaving, he lingered near the door. You know, he said carefully, I used to think Austin was the strongest person in our family. Frances raised an eyebrow slightly. And now Carter gave a small, honest smile. Now I think you were always the strongest. You just didn't know it yet. The words stayed with her long after he left. Later that night, Frances stood alone by the window again, but this time she wasn't watching for threats or memories, or ghosts of the life she used to live. She was just looking at the city, alive, moving, indifferent, her phone lit up softly on the counter. Unknown number. She already knew who it was before she answered. Austin. Silence on the other end, longer than usual, then his voice. Quieter than she remembered. I saw the settlement. Yes, Frances said calmly. Another pause. I didn't think it would feel like this, he admitted. Frances leaned lightly against the window frame. How did you think it would feel? A faint, bitter exhale. Final. It is final, she said softly. That landed between them heavily. For the first time, there was no negotiation in his voice, no strategy, no emotional manipulation, just honesty stripped bare. I keep thinking about the lake house, Austin said quietly. Frances closed her eyes briefly. Of course he did, don't she? Replied gently. A pause. I didn't deserve you, he said finally. Frances didn't answer immediately, because part of her had once spent years trying to convince him of that. Now she didn't need him to agree. I know, she said simply. Silence again. Then Austin's voice cracked slightly. Do you ever regret it, us? Frances looked out at the city lights. For a long time she didn't speak, because the truth wasn't simple. She didn't regret loving him. She didn't regret trying. She didn't regret the woman she had been, but she also didn't want to return to her. No, she said finally, a shaky breath on the other end, but I don't belong there anymore. Austin went quiet, not angry, not defensive, just quiet. For once, no argument followed. Finally, he spoke softly. I hope you're happy. Frances closed her eyes for a moment, not because she needed permission, but because hearing it from him used to matter so much. Now it was just a sentiment. I am learning how to be, she said gently. A long silence. Then goodbye, Frances. She didn't hesitate this time. Goodbye, Austin. She ended the call, no shaking hands, no tears, just stillness, the kind that doesn't follow endings, but begins them. Frances set her phone down and turned back toward the window. Chicago stretched endlessly before her. Not perfect, not healed, but open. And for the first time in 12 years, Frances Wells didn't feel like she was standing in someone else's story. She felt like she was finally writing her own. Behind her, the apartment stayed quiet. Ahead of her, the future didn't ask permission. It simply waited, and Frances at last was ready to meet it. What Frances learned wasn't that love is dangerous. It's that love without truth slowly turns into self-erasure. She didn't lose Austin in a single moment of betrayal. She lost herself in 1,000 small compromises she called understanding patience and keeping the peace. That's what makes emotional betrayal so devastating. It doesn't just break trust. It rewrites identity. Frances spent years believing that being kind meant being quiet, that being loyal meant accepting less, and that being a good wife meant shrinking her own needs until they were almost invisible. But healing didn't come from revenge. It didn't come from exposing Austin or watching his world collapse. It came from something quieter and far more powerful. She stopped negotiating her worth. She stopped asking to be chosen by someone who had already shown her she wasn't a priority. And in that silence, she finally heard herself again. The hardest truth Frances had to accept was this: love is not enough when respect is missing. A relationship can survive conflict, distance, even mistakes. But it cannot survive repeated emotional abandonment disguised as ambition or betrayal disguised as stress. When someone consistently chooses themselves at the expense of your dignity, staying is not loyalty, it becomes self-betrayal. What saved Frances wasn't becoming stronger in the way people usually imagine. It was remembering she was already strong before she started abandoning herself for someone else's comfort. She didn't become powerful after the breakup. She simply returned to who she was before she learned to disappear. And maybe that's the real lesson healing is not becoming someone new. It's unbecoming everything that taught you to accept less than you deserve. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever loved someone who made you forget your own value, or if you've ever had to rebuild yourself after being broken, and quietly, share your thoughts in the comments. Your story might be the one someone else needs to hear tonight. And if you believe in stories about emotional healing, self-worth, and reclaiming your life after betrayal, don't forget to like and subscribe. There are many more stories like Frances's waiting stories about heartbreak, awakening, and the quiet power of choosing yourself.